Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about agriculture in the context of conversion, because that is some of the research that we have done, a lot of it, and it's really about looking at those soils in a different way. You cannot look at them in the same way as you would an established agricultural field, even a tired field. So this is about looking at something new and making it work the best for you. Oops. Okay, before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that the research that we did took place on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kamloops to Secwepemc within the Secwepemc Nation traditional lands. I also want to acknowledge the Devicks. They are a big ranching family in the Kamloops area, and they were very nice to let us work like crazy on their soils. So a little bit about me. I think I've got about 45 minutes here. So depending how fast I talk, we'll just see how we go. I am the researcher and coordinator for the Thompson Rivers University side of the BC Living Lab Cattle and Forage Project. We are into our last year. This was a really incredible project because it was producer driven. So we really had to work on blending science with the producer in a way that the producer actually wanted to use it. It had to be practical. If it didn't work, we had to change it or adjust it. So it was a really valuable opportunity. You can see who our funders were at the bottom there. And so what we were primarily working on was, ways to extend the grazing season. The overarching theme of the Living Lab is climate change mitigation. So by working on these extensions of grazing, that was less time on the tractor for the operator, less time with animals in the feedlot, having to be fed grain. So we were just trying to kill two birds with one stone, saving the rancher money and mitigating climate change effects. So to do this, we were working on the use of annual and cover crops for that grazing season extension. On our particular place, we were looking at the cover crops and we were also grazing standing corn. And then we were also looking at the nutrient budgeting. So especially the nitrogen budgeting, because as we all know, and I'll talk about this, fertilizer costs are going through the absolute roof. And so we were really trying to get that efficiency just dialed right in. Oh, okay. So before I get started, I just want to draw everybody's attention to this map. This is from a study that you'll see on the bottom there. And the crux of the study was this, that if you look at this map on those dark blue areas, farmable areas are going to probably increase by a third in the next 100 years because of climate change. And if you look at those dark blue areas, you'll see that the Yukon is right up in there. And these are areas in which they predict crops like corn, soy, and wheat will be grown. So this is a really great opportunity for northern food security. The climate will allow you to grow things that you couldn't before. But what I argue, and what we have found, is that even if the climate is saying that you can start to grow all these things, the soils certainly will not be ready. There needs to be work done for sure. And with this ability to grow more things, there's the opportunity for people to sort of start clearing areas. And again, those soils are completely different and not ready for growing. So it really becomes a situation where let's grow things, but first there's got to be work put in to build up your soils. So I'm just going to quickly talk about where we did our research, and I'll let you know how that sort of applies to you. Our research was at the Devick's Ranch in Kamloops. You can see that with the star there, so a little bit north of Kamloops. And in addition to this grazing season extension, the rancher was actually physically going to clear some land because he could. So this area of land was already a bit compromised because of droughts, a warming climate. The forest wasn't looking so great, neither was the grassland. So you can see that in 2019, we had a really nice mix of forest and grassland. And the greatest opportunity ever is that he cleared a bit of both so that we could compare and see what was happening when a forest was cleared or a grassland was cleared. And a little bit north of that, you can see there was also a grassland cleared where we planted the cover crop. So we had some corn, we had some cover crop, and we were able to see how both responded to being cleared with agriculture. And I just want to point that little bit out because I'm going to have a little picture for you later on, but you'll see that's where the forest actually was. And then north of that was the grassland. So how does this apply to the Yukons? Maybe some of you folks are thinking, oh, Kamloops, not really related. But I would suggest it really does, because in this instance, this situation of the changing warming climate allowed us and the rancher to grow this crop where it previously had not. Absolutely not. Corn had not been grown at this elevation. And even the cover crop species we chose were, not previously grown at this elevation. And the other good opportunity for you and for our research was that this native ecosystem was being cleared to immediately grow a crop, which a lot of people do. And so what we found, and I'm going to go into a lot more details, but just in a nice nutshell, the soil health, and I will be talking about what that means, what you'll be looking at when you want to measure your health. The soil health was significantly lower in that converted forest over the converted grassland. And that directly translated to our crop yield. So where the forest was, the yield was much lower, despite the fact that those two areas were side by side. They had the exact same amendments, fertilizers put on, treatment. The yield there was way lower. And the quality where the forest was much lower. So the crude protein was significantly lower in that area. And the crop actually matured quite a bit slower in that area than in the area that was the grassland. And so what we could take away from that, and I think what most people should take away from that, is that soil health is absolutely critical, and it is the most valuable crop input. The other concept that is really important to think about as we start to clear these lands to make way for agriculture is that those soils have a memory. So sometimes we call that ecological memory, sometimes we call that the legacy effect, but it's there, and for quite a significant amount of time, the composition of that soil, the chemicals, the biologicals, they will be thinking that they're still a forest, and you have to convince them otherwise. Here's just another way to drive that point home about ecological memory. So this is from a drone image we took of our field where it's really nice and dark and orange. Those are areas where the crop was really thick and dense, and where it's lighter, that's where it's, a little patchy. And so what you'll see is where that forest used to be, you can basically, it's like a footprint or a handprint. You can see exactly where it used to be because that is where it is patchier and not performing it as well. So certainly the memory is still there 3 years on. So soil health, it's very difficult to define. It's like thinking about defining happiness or things like that. So there are many different variables that we look at when we want to define this. I actually used a score, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to talk about what are the basics of soil health. And when I say soil health, it means that these functions, biological, chemical, and physical, are functioning at the top of their game. Okay, they are optimally functioning. And so when they are optimally functioning, you will see, and this is definitely the proofs in the pudding, you will see an increase in your yield. Your nutrient availability will be better, and we're going to talk more about that. Your water quality and availability in your soil will be much better, and then your farm will be able to resist drought effects and resistance to disease. So what this really means is resilience in the face of the unpredictable weather events, etc., associated with climate change. And when your farm can resist that because it's healthy, it means that, at the end of the day, you will have a better chance, better bank account than somebody whose soils are not quite as healthy because they don't have the resilience. So it really is an insurance policy for you to build up the soils. So I always suggest that the best way, absolutely, and now this is always in the context of clearing land. This is what we're going to be talking about. But you know what? You could think about it also in terms of, maybe a tired field, but get to know your soil. Get to know the elements that make your soil healthy. And so what we see here are the chemicals. So in this case, we'd be looking at the nutrients. So what have you got in there? Nitrogen, how much phosphorus, your pH, and we're going to talk about all these things. Your cation exchange capacity, which is a really interesting one. It's always on your soil test. People tend to avoid it. And salinity. Then we have our physical side. So we've got the texture, the structure, the aggregates. How does the water flow through? And then we have what I think is the powerhouse is the biological, okay? With the big one being the organic matter content. Organic matter is all that dead and decaying material. It could be leaves, crop residue, the organisms within the soil, okay? And so all that's working together with things like your plant roots, the soil organisms. All of these different components of health are working together. And what happens when it's optimum is that the nutrients in the soil become available to your plants much more readily than if these things weren't functioning at their optimum. So let's talk first about the physical components of a soil, especially in the context of a converted soil. So a lot of people mix up texture versus structure. It's really easy and a common thing that happens. But texture is basically what you've got is what you've got. We can try and improve it, but it's basically comes from the parent material, and it is the percentage of sand, silt, and clay in your soil. Okay, so sandy soils, big particles, coarse. If you think about it, water's running right through. Clay, totally different. So when we convert a forest, typically what you're going to see, what we saw, I've been told perhaps what you'll see up there, is a higher sand silt content. You will have a much lower organic matter, like very low. Typically, your soil will be very nutrient poor. You will have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, which I will talk about a bit later on. And so what's happening with this coarser soil is that your nutrients are going to wash out before your crops can use them, despite what you put on there in terms of a fertilizer. So what you may see on your farm initially, if you haven't taken the time to really build it up, is that your soils are drying out quickly in the summer, and you're having this sort of extremely inconsistent crop performance because the nutrients aren't cycling in there. Now, if you're converting a grassland, bit of a meadow, maybe a wetter area, you're typically going to have a higher clay content. Clay hangs on to nutrients. That's very important to know. It's like the conductor of nutrients. And so you definitely want that in your soil. But if you have too much clay, you're going to have excess moisture and a really heavy texture. And so what you may see on your farm initially, again, if you haven't taken some time to build up those soils, is you will see standing water. You may see that already in some of your fields. When it rains, it's very poor in terms of drainage. Driving your tractor around, you're going to start to see some compaction. Your fields will be slow to warm up, and you will see sometimes, if you're not irrigating in the summer, that hard pan cracking, and it's just kind of like a piece of pottery. Imagine that. You've just got this hard bowl, nothing going in, nothing going out, okay? And so what you would see in this case is maybe stunted roots as well. And basically, though, it's the water which is happening there. What you really want, and everybody knows this, I think, is that everybody wants the loam soil for agriculture. If you're converting a soil, you probably will not have that. So a loam, 40 sand, 40 silt, 20 clay. This is the ideal, but you can mimic it. So if you start to amend your soil with organic matter, and we're going to talk about what that might look like for you, you can start to mimic the benefits, the ideal soil that you could have and help
How
you.
does that equal that? But that's just like that.
Oh, I heard a bit of a comment there. Is that, should I keep going?
Yeah,
Okay, I'm gonna,
sorry. Sarah just
okay,
joined us and I just put her
okay,
on mute.
okay. All right. Okay, so really good ways for you to figure out the texture of your soil, and I believe that we might be doing some of this on the field day, is for this part, you don't need a lab. 100%, if you have some converted lands, get out there and figure out what your texture is. It will totally determine how well your subsequent crop performs. Grab a little soil in your hand, roll it into a ball, get it nice and wet, and then just start like rubbing your hand together. If your hand feels kind of sticky and you can like get a nice little ball ribbon forming, you probably have a fine textured high clay soil. If it feels really slick and slippery, you probably have a lot of silt. And then if it's just really gritty, it can't form a ball at all, you likely have a lot of sand in your soil. We tend to find that when we are doing these converted soils, they're extreme. Okay. So it would be very obvious that, you have one way more than the other. These soils are all or nothing kind of a thing to think about. And you really need to encourage them to adopt the different sort of textures. The other way to do it is the glass jar soil test. It's actually kind of fun. You just take a cup of soil, you stick it in a mason jar, you fill that up with water and add a bit of detergent and leave it overnight. The soil will naturally start to separate out into its components with the sand on the bottom, silt in the middle, and clay on top. And then you can look at it then, and it will give you a really good sense of what kind of soil you have, because then you can determine what and how to deal with it to best get performance. So when we're talking about physical, well, we're also talking about structure. Structure is, you'll hear a lot of people talking about it. Structure is the way in which these texture particles bind together. And so when we talk about materials binding together in soil, we really are talking about aggregates. So aggregates, you take a little clump of soil, you take a handful, you kind of drop it down. When you get those nice looking chunks, we call them PEDs. Those are called aggregates. Those are made up of not only your soil texture particles, but you've got maybe some roots, some dead plant material, dead or dying microorganisms. You've got the glue from those roots and microorganisms holding them together. These are so important when we talk about soil health. In fact, the Soil Health Institute uses your aggregates and their stability as one of the best measures of your soil health, and you can totally look at it yourself in your field. And so why are they so important? It's because when they're stable, when they're holding together, they create these sort of scenarios where you have some soil aggregates, then you've got pore space with water, you've got air, and that creates the perfect situation for plants to grow. So when we talk about good structure, that means you have really stable aggregates. And so if we look at this picture here, you'll see that when you have really great soil structure with these lovely aggregates and pore space, your roots and plants can spread out, access water, access air, access the nutrients in that water. But if your aggregates have no stability, you will see compaction. So water, again, sitting on the top, flowing away. You will see surface crusting, like I talked about, and then that hard tillage pan below. So if you were in your field, or maybe on our field day, we dig a hole, a little pit. If you're looking at your roots of a plant and they're kind of stunted at the top, You might put some people put a screwdriver or a long pole into the soil and you just kind of tap it and it feels very hard. Chances are you have, poor aggregation of soils. The solution to that, again, is organic matter. I'm going to keep talking about that throughout, but it's really the best way. So a really fun way to test your aggregates. It's super easy again. And I would highly recommend that everybody does this to understand what's going on with their soil. This is also a really good way to monitor your soil improvement over time. As is the texture one, maybe you can't, you could just see what you've got. This is a really good way to measure improvement over time. So all you need, again, just a couple of jars. If you want to measure 2 times, you need a bit of mesh screen. And then you take these PEDs or these aggregates that you've collected, so little chunks of soil, let them dry on your windowsill for 24 hours, fill your jar with water, drop them in. What happens? If you are seeing bubbles forming and those little aggregates are staying together, it means you have a very healthy pore structure. It means there's water in there and oxygen. If the water around it stays clear, again, you have very strong, stable aggregates with good biological binding. If the water starts turning cloudy and brown, your aggregates start to disintegrate. That means that the aggregates are slaking. That is the term. And it means you don't have great structure. And these kind of soils are really vulnerable to erosion and compaction. So, the thing to note with this is that it can be improved. And so that's why I really like to encourage people to do this on their own, because they can just keep looking year after year. If you look at that link right there, this is what I've personally used many times. We use it at TRU. It's the Slakes app, and it's kind of fun. You can use your phone to measure how fast these aggregates disintegrate, and it gets saved on your phone. And so it's a really great way to monitor as well. All right, now we are on to the chemical side of soil health. And in this case, I totally encourage everybody to get a soil test. It's well and fine to do these tests yourself, but I feel like for this one, especially when we're talking about a converted land, it's kind of critical that you actually get the soil test. Now, I've been told that the Yukon actually will test your soils. I think you get 1 per year. I just actually took this right off the website. So that's a really good option. But I still encourage people to understand what their soil test says for the chemical side of their soil health and how to take it. A lot of people work with agrologists and they just sort of tell them what they should put on. Oh, somebody's raised their hand.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to let you guys know that all farmers, I'm with the agriculture branch, all farmers do get unlimited soil tests. If you are producing or you are on ag land, if you are a gardener, that's when you receive 1 test a year.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make that perfectly clear for everybody. Everyone who's a farmer, please reach out. We are more than happy to take a whole bunch for you. Gardeners, please bring in your own samples.
Okay. Yeah, so this is a really great option. We don't have this everywhere. Like typically the producers I'm working with will either be paying an agrologist or doing it themselves. So the fact that you can get these unlimited tests is really valuable. But still, you should know what's going on with them so that you can, again, monitor your soils. So your test is only as good as your sample, especially when we're looking at newly cleared lands, but this is for anything, honestly. Divide your field 100%. So if you recall that first image I showed you of our field, half of it had been forest, half grassland. As part of the experiment, we treated it all the same way, but it's not the same at all. So technically, both those areas should not have been treated the same way. So go out into your field and look at what you see. You should divide your field by topography. Do you see a hill? Is there some high area? Is there some low-lying area? Certainly those would be 2 different areas. Land use history. What was there? Maybe something different from there to there. Maybe you see some bizarre crop performance in one area. That would be a different section. Okay. So these are all different sections. Maybe you draw yourself a map and divide it up. It's very important, especially so that you're not wasting money applying things that you don't need to apply. When you collect your samples and you've divided your area, take at least 10 per area. You just want to be random. You want to zigzag across that field. And when you collect your soils, make sure you remove all that surface residue, the vegetation. You don't want to sample your crop. You want to sample the soil. And you're just going to combine it into a bucket. And we call this a composite sample. Now, especially on these converted lands, sample at 2 depths. Most people don't do that. It's not maybe standard, but it's really, really important, especially for these kinds of soils that we're talking about here. At the 0 to 15 or 0 to 6 inches, this is where you have the action. This is where the nutrients are typically hanging out, the roots, the biological activity. Okay, this is going to tell you exactly what your crop is sort of supposed to be getting. Now, sampling at the 15 to 30 centimeters is really important for these converted soils because the soils are so new to what's going on. Sometimes they're not taking the nutrients. The plants aren't taking it. The soil's not giving it. And so what's happening is something that you're applying is leaching down. And so what you get when you sample down there is showing you, maybe I didn't apply the right amount. This is a waste of money or whatever. So totally suggest and recommend that you are sampling at the 2 depths. Keep them separate. I tend to walk around with 2 buckets. I've got my top layer in the one, my bottom in the other. But again, this is going to really help you understand how the nutrients are cycling in your soils. Are they getting into the plant, or are they just kind of going through and hanging out down below? How often to sample? For regular fields, they suggest 1-3 years. Spring, that's great. Spring and fall, even better if we want to look at how our lost nutrients or not. But if you are sampling a converted land, you must do it every year. They are so unstable, which I'm going to show you in a sec with our fields, but they're just like all over the place. So it's very difficult to start making prescriptions and fertilizers unless you're looking at it all the time because it's always changing. So I'm just going to quickly go through a soil test and I want you to sort of understand what's going on here. Just with the very basics here, I'm not going to get into anything too in depth, but from the view of a converted soil, I'm going to sort of address a Yukon situation, but this is our site. And I also want you to look as we go through at, like you'll see very high, very low, etc. What's going on with these converted soils? Because remember, a lot of fertilizer, compost, etc. was applied to our fields, but we talked about these reduced yields. So the most important one, I think, especially when you're trying to build your soils, is the organic matter. You'll see it there. It is a percentage. In the Yukon, I know that you have very low organic percentages, around the 2 to 5. We also started with that, and you'll see that totally built up. We're now at 8.5 after 3 years. So this was after managed grazing, incorporation of residue, compost. So after 3 years, we really brought that up. Phosphorus, also really important with these converted soils. It's really important for root growth, okay, early growth. The thing is that it binds really tightly to these soil particles and can move off site quickly. Animal manures are great sources, but I want you to note here that it's really high on this field after 3 years. Potassium, another one of the macronutrients, really important for structure. If you don't have enough, you'll see things like lodging, the wheat's falling over, etc. But too much can result in an excess in your crop, and it can outcompete the other nutrients in there, and then it can start to impact the animals eating it. So it will, interfere with uptake of calcium, magnesium, and start to, we're going to start to see things like milk fever, etc. If that's something you're solely feeding as a crop with that sort of thing going on. Again, very high here, despite applying normal amounts. Nitrate, This is the plant available form of nitrogen. Nitrogen is not really in its pure state useful or available to plants. It's not there at all. You must look at the nitrate or the ammonium. In this case, that is what the plant can take up. So when we talk about the cycle in a second here, you'll know how this gets from nitrogen to nitrate. This is the stuff you need right here. Nitrate sits in the soil water. So remember we talked about aggregates and those nice pore spaces. That's where it's sitting, waiting to be taken up by a plant or leaching out if you have too much. And here again, very high, too high. pH, the sweet spot, 6 to 7.5. If you have too high, too low, the nutrients in your soil are unavailable to your plants. So this is something that you should definitely be monitoring in a converted land. Now, cation exchange capacity. Most people kind of glaze over this one, but I think it's very important. And I'm just going to put it in a sort of interesting way that I think helps me to understand it. This just kind of tells you how many stalls in the parking lot for nutrients. So I can see with this around 12.6, I do have kind of a sandy, silty soil. There's kind of a mid-range number of parking spots in my parking lot. If we had a really high clay, the parking lot would have way more parking spots. And so if we move over to this one, the saturation, what you want to see here is who is in the parking spots. And what you want to see is this sort of range here of which I've laid out. When you start to see weird numbers in here that don't sort of look like this, you've got an imbalance of nutrients in your soil. You've got some too many, say, potassiums in the parking lot, and they shouldn't be there. When I look at my sample here, I see that I've got too many hydrogens in my parking spots, and that makes sense because in this soil, my pH has been declining for the past 3 years. So my hydrogens are creating like this acidity, and so something's going on here. I also want to mention that this is a newly established agricultural soil. It's been hit hard with a lot of amendments, but my crop yields are still too low. So what's going on here? I've got really high measurements of everything, but bad crop performance. And so this is really telling me that some kind of nutrient cycling issue is going on, and that makes sense for this type of soil. Here is, I'm just going to show you quickly. I know graphs can sometimes be very boring, but this is just showing the roller coaster of a converted soil. So you'll see here, the orange is where the grassland area was, and the blue is like where the forest was. It's just all over the place. So the grassland, the organic matter goes up, down. The forest really is going high, but then our nitrate up, down, high. Like it's just all over the place. The pH is declining, phosphorus up then down. So it's quite chaotic. And that really does tell me that when we get to the next part, that this biological community, this soil is really trying very hard to adjust to this new way of being. And that's when we get into the soil biology. Soil is an ecosystem. It is responsible for, the biology is responsible for the decomposition of the leaves, the plant residue, everything. It is completely responsible for nutrient cycling. So, you know, how does that compost and the nitrogen in there get into your plant? It is responsible for soil structure, plant growth, carbon storage, and by that I just quite simply mean the organic matter, okay? This is the thing to think about though, however, when we talk about these transformed lands. The sort of the way that we have, maybe we have this amount of fungi, then we have this amount of bacteria, that is still thinking it's a forest, okay? It's remembering what it used to be. The bacteria and the other things were still there, but they were just quiet, okay? Now they are being asked to change into an environment that is really good for agriculture. So you've really disrupted this community, and it's going to take time because this biology does not adapt overnight. You have to build up organic matter to sort of encourage the species like the bacteria that are good for plants to build up into an agricultural field. Okay, a really good way to look at this is with the nitrogen cycle, and I'm just going to quickly gloss over this, but this is a really, I find, helpful way to understand how important the biology of the soil is. So you've got nitrogen in the atmosphere, you've got nitrogen in your manure, in the organic matter, but it is not available for plants in that form at all. When it gets into the soil, those biological components, those bacteria, those fungi, they start taking that unavailable form, using all their enzymes and all that magic to turn it into a form that's available to the plants. So in this instance, we were talking about nitrates. Yes, you can apply some of these chemical fertilizers that will directly go into the plant, but it doesn't create a very resilient soil. It creates one that is totally dependent on the chemical fertilizer, and not on the processes within the soil that are actually, if you've done the work, are for free, taking this nitrogen and putting it into your plants. Okay, so it's a critical way and an important thing to build up. So there's been lots of studies. If you have a very healthy, high-functioning soil microbiological community, you can actually reduce your chemical inputs by 30%. And that's a great thing because as of March 2026, nitrogen fertilizer prices jumped by 30 to 40%. So if you are completely reliant on that, that's a scary thing because I don't know, with global things going on, etc., it is very likely that the prices will continue to rise. So the best prescription for that is to build the community in the soil so it can do more of the work for you. I just want to show this other image. When you increase that biological community, you are improving the nutrient cycling. So your inputs go down, and your crop performance increases, as you can see in the below ground action with all the roots. If you increase the inputs, your actual plant productivity at the root level does go down. And I'm going to talk about this in a sec, but when you add so much chemical fertilizer, the plant actually gets a bit lazy. It stops its relationship with the surrounding microbes in the soil. And so then all it does is start to rely on the chemical fertilizer. And we talked about in the forest where some of those bacteria and fungi go quiet. That's what happens in these fields with a lot of chemical fertilizer use. The bacteria that work to make that nitrogen available, they just go quiet. And so if all of a sudden you are faced with a fertilizer shortage, you're going to have a bit of a hard time building that back up again. I know this is a bit cheesy, but sometimes people find it helpful to humanoid things. So anyways, this is just showing all those microbes in the soil working hard with the plant to make the phosphorus available, the micronutrients, the nitrates. They're all working together, plant to biological organism, to feed each other. And so when you do this, you have a resilient soil that is going to stand the test if all of a sudden, things like chemical fertilizer become unattainable because of price, limitations, etc. And so the full story is this. You've got your plants, you've got your biological, chemical, physical, all working together to make this sort of system work. But converted soils are new systems. And so this full story does take quite a bit of time. You have to have a lot of patience, and you have to have, the ability to keep building up that organic matter, because that is what is going to make this system work as it should. So how can we do this? Again, I've said it a million times, organic matter. It is the way to do this. Now, I've been told there's some hesitation, a bit of pause on cover cropping up in the northern areas. I know that there's fantastic agriculture going on up there. I've been talking to some people and there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. But I think for when we're talking about converted lands, I do think that the use of cover crops and green manures is the way to go. The reason being is that if you look at this picture here, when you take a land that is not used to being agricultural and you hit it with all these diverse species, you will see a real range and collaboration of root systems and plants. They're not competing with each other. They are actually propagating and encouraging multiple different microbiological communities, multiple ways to take up nutrients. We've got a lot of like roots and things like that that will eventually die. You're building up the organic matter. I would say that it's a great opportunity to improve the soil for at least a couple of years before maybe you want to put it into a pasture. You could also argue that if you did want to go right away with your perennial pasture, again, try to diversify the number of species in there. It's really important to build up that soil community. If you look on the left there, if you just decided to plant one single crop, they're all competing for the same thing. So you don't have this buildup of collaboration. You have competition, you have small root systems, and you're really not doing much to enhance the soil. The other thing to do is leave your crop residues. This is a great way to add the organics, leave them at the surface. This is what we did with our corn. I'm going to talk to you about that, but that's a great way to also build up the organic matter. And manage grazing, 100%. If you look at, and we did manage grazing on our project, but when you manage graze, you are evenly distributing that manure. But at the same time, you are evenly encouraging grazing, so you are not killing plants. If you evenly have grazing, then you have not one plant getting grazed to the ground, dying. You lose that root system. You finally end up with a monocrop. And then what have you got? You've got this sort of weird crop on the left here. You want this. And the only way you're going to get that is if you control how the animals move across and that they eat it all the same. This is the principles of soil health. So the other ways to build up our soils on these converted lands, if at all possible, it's difficult because we're working it up, but reduce the amount of tillage if at all possible. Saves tractor time. It also prevents, the complete breakdown of all those lovely aggregates that you're working to build up. Minimize the use of chemical fertilizers. Take it back as much as you think is possible because those plants do become dependent on it and they will avoid relationships with those microbes. And then you don't get those benefits of those microbes working for you instead of you just, getting them silent. And then finally, yes, careful use of herbicides and pesticides. We definitely used glyphosate in our field. But to take it back as much as possible because you want to build up that life beneath the soil. So our example at the Devick ranch here, so you can see these cows grazing this corn on this newly turned forested area. So what we did is that we actually moved 303 head of cattle through 2.5 acre sections of a 22-acre field. And so how did we build up our organic matter? We had a lot of crop residue left over after they left that area, which was turned in the spring. We evenly distributed our manure, which was fantastic. Again, we just had a built-in nice even distribution of fertilizer in the spring. And the rancher got an additional 48 days of grazing for his cows, in which he didn't need to grain them. He wasn't on the tractor, etc. So he was pretty happy with that. We also did the same thing on the other field where we planted a multi-species cover crop. It added some end of season grazing. So again, less time for the rancher having to feed the cows. We put a lot of crop residue in, even distribution of manure. And for that one, we added diversity. So this was actually the best outcome for us was with this cover crop. Oops, there we go. So you can see here, if anybody's interested, what we were planting. We planted, the grasses. So we were doing triticale. In year 2 was barley peas. But the really exciting one that we did each year was this basically a forage pro. So we had some of the millets, the vetch, but the absolute best thing on these converted soils were these brassicas of the turnips. We had the kale, we had the sugar beets. And so what happened for us is that we waited quite late before we put the cows on. So once they went on, they did have the opportunity to consume some of these turnips and the brassicas, but then it froze, so they couldn't get them all. But then over the winter, they just deteriorated and in the spring turned to mush. And wow, did we ever see an improvement in the organic matter, in the biological activity, etc. So I would totally recommend this practice if you are looking to improve in field, is get going with those with the tubers, with the turnips, etc. I will say not part of this one, but I have had experience working with a hop farmer who was really unhappy with the compaction in his field. In the fall, he planted tillage radishes, and in the spring, it looked like he'd actually aerated his field. All that was left were these like holes where, really improved the structure of the soil. So I would say that for newly converted areas, these turnips are really great. For the Yukon, um, I would say yes. If you are going to convert lands, take at least 2 years. Be brave and try some of these cover crops. You are really going to improve your structure over the 2-year period, after which you're going to see, a much better crop performance from our experience. And also, if you can, if there is opportunity to graze it, that would be great. Um, our rancher that we were dealing with, he actually took one crop off and then grazed it. But because of your shorter season, maybe you just grow it and are able to graze it a bit in a managed way. I think that it's a wonderful way to build up the organic matter. Cover crop options up there. I know that there's already experimentation up there with the barley and the oats. I would think buckwheat might be a great one, forage peas, and certainly give those brassicas a shot. They are wonderful. They certainly worked for us in our situation. I've also been told that there are monies out there for these kinds of things for Yukon farmers. And maybe Aaron will speak more to that after. But yes, there is money out there if you are prepared to fill in this document. I'm told it takes about 5 hours, but someone mentioned quite a bit of money to be had from that. So if you worked it out as an hourly rate, perhaps, I don't know how you want to look at it, but you can get for cover crops up to $500 per hectare. So there are options up there to get some funding to try these things out. And I think that like for when we were working with the Devicks, they had a lot of funding through BC Living Labs. And that sort of helped them adopt some of these practices because they were a bit hesitant. So when you have a bit of a buffer with some kind of funding, that often helps people, sort of get over that hump of thinking about, losing money, which, farming already is quite, financially burdensome sometimes. So it's just like this is something that people might want to look at. The challenges that you'll face up there, honestly, any kind of conversion, what we experienced was a really high carbon to nitrogen ratio after we converted. So you might remove the trees, but you've turned in shrubs, you've turned in the roots, and then all of a sudden there's a lot of carbon, or if you want to think about it, vegetative matter, and very little amount of nitrogen, okay? Who's going to take the nitrogen? It's going to be that soil microbes in there. They're going to take it to grow. The plant will not get it. So you've got what's called a yield drag. So for at least a couple of years, this is also contributing to this poor performance on these converted soils. So recognize that when you're turning that all in, you're just going to have a bit of time where the microbes are growing, etc., before they die and the plant can access the nitrogen. And also, soil microbes in these converted areas are like kids in a candy shop. So if you are adding organic matter fast, which in our situation happened, we had a lot of compost and things like that. It's like, imagine there was nothing and all of a sudden there's a lot. All those microbes in there are just like, go, they're eating it like crazy. And so what happens is that they're really burning through it and you're getting a lot of basically loss to the atmosphere. You're not having it stay in there and work for you. So this is what we found in the corn, certainly much less in the cover cropped areas. So I would argue that the cover crop is a really good way to stabilize those soils more than maybe some of these other high producing annuals. And the other challenge you might have there is obviously climate. Microbial activity is highest between 25 and 35. So with the shorter window, you just have to think about how you're going to capitalize on that. However, activity can still occur down to -6. So this is also a problem. If you've put a whole bunch of organics and good foods into the soil, the microbes are working away on it, but there's no plant to take it up. So you could potentially be losing the good stuff over the winter. So again, thinking about cover, how much you want to put in, it's all kind of, trial by error. So key takeaway, the soil is a system. They have a memory for sure, and you need to work with that to get it to a place where they think they want to be agricultural. And to do that, you need to understand your soil. You need to practice those things I was talking about to understand those functions of biological, chemical, and physical. And then just recognize these converted soils are totally unstable. So don't be alarmed if you see things going all over the place. It's just a process to get to a place where the soil is actually productive in the agricultural sense. And to work with this, certainly get regular soil testing for sure, and crop testing. I would totally recommend that. Your crop test can show you what's going on in there, and it's a really good monitoring tool as well. And finally, feed the soil, feed the crop. Absolutely 100%. I would suggest always feeding the soil first. And finally, questions and opportunities. I think this kind of thing that's coming up, Julia bringing these things, this is a really good way to get locally adapted agriculture that's going to strengthen food security. And based on my experience with the BC Living Labs, and I feel like when Julia is speaking about these things, it's a way to develop practical recommendations. Because let's face it, if it's not going to work for the farmer, even if it seems great in science, nobody's going to adopt it. So let's get some practical things going on that people actually want to use. I personally am very interested to see which crop system will best maximize the soil health and nutrient cycling for you. And I really am interested in seeing which farming practice will best improve the soil health and yield following these conversions. So yeah, it's just a really wonderful opportunity here to get something wonderful going on. So thank you. That's me.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was a really engaging, interesting, and relevant presentation, I think. I hope everyone got at least as much out of it as I did. I thought it was a really interesting observation you made at the beginning about how just because the climate is changing at a certain speed, that the soils aren't necessarily moving at that same speed, and that they do have a memory. And so for us to remember that while we could get really excited about doing something, we all have to move at the speed of soil. So thank you for that perspective. That was really refreshing and
Oh,
interesting.
good. Thanks for
So,
having me.
do we have any questions? I'm sure we do. So who's going to be brave and go first? Oh, there we go. Sorry, my computer just froze up for a second. Okay, Karen, go ahead.
I had to turn the mic back on. So just kind of looking, okay, so we live on 8 acres, 8.6, and where we are is actually ancient old riverbed. So there's a bank on the far side, and then we live in a clearing that's flat, and it was treed with, sorry, fairly large spruce trees. At one point, it was used for a sawmill logging landing yard. When we dissed it, we pulled so many rocks and sticks and bands from the logs and things like that. But we also cleared a spot in the back. So I'm a little excited about when converting from forested land to something else. Currently we still have to pull the stumps out and do all that. But I'm happy that we took this, like that I was able to attend this and know a little bit more before we got too far with it. One of my questions is so when we put our fence in, we punched fence posts in every 10 feet. And what we found on our land is we have basically mostly pit run, an inch down. When they did the landing yard, they pushed off all the top soil off to one side. So it did get scraped down fairly far. And then over the last 25 years, I've grazed animals on it, seeded it in a forage pasture and things like that. But it does need reseeding. We don't dare till it because we'll just stir up all those rocks again. But we've got like maybe an inch of soil and then these pit run, which is a gravel and large rocks and small rocks and all of that. But what we did find is we've got these bands of like gorgeous sandy loam soil, and we dug down 6 feet, couldn't reach rock again. So I don't know how, like aside from just identifying where these bands are and then trying to, add material to the place to everywhere else where the pit run garbage soil is. But how best to utilize those, sorry, those bands of absolutely gorgeous sandy loam soil.
Yeah, it sounds like you're facing the situation that so many people face, is that you can take a walk across many fields and you will just find the most, insane differences from like 4 feet away kind of a thing. So, I'm glad that you brought this to everybody's attention because it is a common problem that you will have within a field, 5 different soil types. So the best way to utilize that, I guess, is recognize it like you do, and then don't be amending it or treating it in the same way as you would other areas if you're considering like fertilizing and things like that, right? Because you've got one area that's great and others that are nutrient poor. So I think the best way, like you mentioned, is to identify it and treat them differently, if that is helpful at all. So really work on focusing on, I would be focusing on building up the organics in those more gravelly areas.
Anybody else have a question? Or do you have a follow-up, Karen?
Nope, I was just going to say, yeah, thanks for that. I guess, I mean, that's kind of what we've been doing. So we'll just keep
Yeah.
continuing. And yeah, it's just like we're learning where we are. Unfortunately, I built a barn on probably the best part of it.
Oh
So
yeah. That
yeah,
happens. That
who
happens.
knew, right? Who knew? But it's an old barn. It can come down.
Yeah. 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 I would just say, you know, careful amendments on the areas that need it and then not where they don't, because otherwise you're kind of like wasting your time, right?
Tanya, what would you say is the hardest component to shift or which takes the longest time? The biological, the chemical, or the physical
Um,
in
uh,
a Yukon context?
yeah, I would think in the Yukon context, I mean, for the most part, the physical you can't do too much with. But I'd say the most part is that biological for sure, because you're dealing with these climate challenges, nutrient poor soils, etc., right? So it's about, I would say, working within short time frames, seasonally to just build it up because, you want to get that functioning for you. So you're not having, even if you are applying fertilizer, if the functioning is not working right, like you'll see on the soil test I showed, it just keeps getting higher and higher without the crop performance. So you need to ignite it. And that's a challenge. I mean, we saw it as well.
Anybody else have any burning questions for Tanya? Marilyn?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Um, I've got a question where I am. There's a lot of the ag land out here is being developed in like spruce forests and bogs. And my understanding, and it's kind of a relatively new understanding, is that spruce tree roots put off something that causes things not to grow there, which makes sense because nothing grows under a spruce tree. Do you know how you would like mitigate that, or how long it would take for that to leave a soil area?
That's a great question. Like we call that like allelopathic tendencies. Um, yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, we actually have the same problem out here, but with knapweed. And knapweed actually like completely chemically changes the soil. And so we just did lots of different trials on just different grasses. So I think it would be about, I mean, this is kind of not the greatest advice, but it would just be about, trial and error to get the right species of a perennial is honestly what I would go with. But maybe, I don't know. That's a really great question about post spruce. Have you tried? Like, what have you tried that does work or doesn't work?
Well, I haven't. Sort of what I've developed has been cleared for quite a while, and it's a clay soil.
Hmm.
But there's areas now that I have to sort of redo that has never actually been planted to anything. And it's got like there's tons of little spruce coming up again, lots of small poplar.
Mhm.
And I was wondering like what good choices. And then also being in the Yukon,
Mhm.
what grows here?
Yeah.
Like I'm planting hay mostly, right?
Yeah.
And it, so brome grass, grows well, but
Mhm.
it also, yeah,
Yeah.
I've been leaning heavily on fertilizers.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Like maybe part of the problem too is that you've got such a heavy clay soil and that you need something with some
It,
good,
it,
it is heavy clay?
yeah, it is. And then the other part is for the newer areas, like what can I put in to kind of build that up? Like,
Yeah.
I have horses, so their manure brings a wealth of weeds with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Um,
compost can be good to break up the clay.
but like, what about?
I mean, this doesn't actually probably directly apply to you, but I've seen a soil actually that was really heavy clay where they were growing blueberries. And they actually started amending it with sawdust and humic acid, and it really made a huge difference. But I think the problem here also is that you have this heavy clay, and you need to get some longer rooted, organics in there to break it up.
Okay, so
I,
that was actually a question I was going to ask you, was about sawdust and like straw,
mm,
that kind
I,
of stuff. Would that
I've
help
seen
to
it,
kind of
yeah.
turn it more into dirt?
I've seen it work, yeah, for the perennials like the bush, the blue, like the blueberries. Even somebody was growing haskaps doing that. But you know what? There's like really good expertise up there with people growing that. So maybe Erin could say something to that if she's still on.
Erin, we still got you. Marilyn, how's your pH?
I can't remember because I haven't got my soil test with me, and I haven't tested in a few years.
Hmm.
I've been meaning to reach out to the egg branch to come out and
Yeah.
We were I was
do
just
that.
out in Labrador where they're actually dealing with a very similar issue. They're like spruce everywhere and converting, and that was an issue for them as well. So yeah, I'll dig into this a little bit more, and I'm hoping I can kind of connect my Yukon folks with my Labrador folks because you guys are dealing with a lot of similar issues. But I like the allelopathy is going to persist longer for you because of your short growing season. But the worst of it should be over in the first few years, from what I understand. But you can expect it to persist for, up to 10 years in your colder climates. Do we still have Aaron? Maybe she
Okay.
out.
Hi, I have Randy here. We're also from agriculture.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I got a lot more background there. It's absolutely true. If you're developing a field in a spruce or pine field and you have the chipping done, you're going to have residual, it's a class of chemicals called terpenes, which are detrimental to the next crops, but they do break down with time. So if you're using wood chips or wood chip based compost, or have the previous field as deciduous trees like aspen, birch, cottonwoods. You always have to look out for the roots there, but those are more beneficial. And a really good place to read up about that, Marilyn, would be in the EMR library. We have a book called The Market Garden or Market Gardener. They did a lot of research on this out of Quebec and Laval University using ramial wood chips, which is deciduous wood chips. And they're beneficial, and they caution you about using spruce or pine because of the terpenes and other chemicals that will persist, but will break down in a few years or longer. So yeah, you guys are touching on the surface of it, and we did do that 3-year trial recently, but we weren't able to find large enough sections of deciduous trees to do a comparison. So we just went with the mixed boreal forest, which is spruce, pine, aspen, everything.
Okay, just one more question about that. So if you had sawdust from presumably spruce trees, but old sawdust, like has been sitting for probably 15 years, would my assumption be that that would be sort of safer then?
Yeah, I would say safer or better, but certainly not fresh stuff and young, uncomposted stuff that could have some, I don't know how detrimental it is. My ears perked up when you're talking about allelopathy because we do have a native grass here, fescue, which can get in. It's a small innocuous grass, can get into a hay field, and it will displace brome. It has so many chemical things going on, and it's sort of the bane of certain hay farmers up here, but you don't notice it until your brome is half gone, ironically. But yeah, the spruce and pine have the same thing, those detrimental chemicals. But I would say if it's sawdust and it's very old and bleached, it's probably much better than the fresh stuff. So if you're mulching berries or whatever, I wouldn't be too concerned about pathways, but if you're mulching vegetables, fruit, berries, be cautious with the young wood chips or sawdust.
Interesting. Okay, thank you.
So, Randy, when you applied the like spruce wood chips, more like the deciduous, but for that you did see improvement?
We didn't have a clean enough break between batches to do a controlled experiment that way. But if you use, I'm trying to remember the French Canadian fellow's name, but the book is The Market Gardener, and he specializes in. He's really famous. He's going to come up here and give some guest talks. It's JP something.
Okay.
I could always send you the. I know the cover of the book well, and that's what sort of led us to investigate this ramial wood chip, which is where you're taking the young deciduous trees and branches and doing that, and they're beneficial with all the nutrients in the bark and the green wood. But yeah, there was a paper and it talked about all the detriments of the coniferous sourced mulch and wood chips.
Absolutely.
I think that's Jean-Martin Fortier who wrote that book.
Oh, yeah, Fortier, yes.
Yeah.
What was I? JP, JM. That's him.
Anybody else have a question for Tanya or your local support folks there? All right. Well, Tanya and I are going to be heading up there in few weeks soon. And really hope to see all of you at our field day. We are also looking for places to come and visit on the Friday before the field day, trying to gather just some more on the ground practical knowledge so that we can help to inform next year's programming and make sure that you guys are getting the supports and resources that you actually need. So if you think it would be helpful for us to come out to your farm and see what your challenges and opportunities are, we'd love to do that. If there's somebody you think that we should go and see that's not here today, please connect us. You can shoot me an email, jsmith@smallscalemeat.ca, or you could probably reply to something that Eventbrite Magic Robots sent you. They'll probably still find me. Yeah, and if you have any follow-up questions, please send them over so we can be sure to cover it in the field day. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Tanya? Going to give people some homework before the field day?
Oh, homework. Ooh. I would say get to know your soils, please. That would be really good if you practice some of those things that I was showing you so that we can sort of, if you do come to the field day, we can talk about, the limitations of your soil or what's going on. That would be fantastic.
And we have a setup right now so that all of you Yukon producers can get a free membership to the Small Scale Meat Producers Association this year. Just enter Yukon, I think it's in all caps on the membership page. And that's the best way to keep in touch with us. And so we can keep in touch with you too. So take advantage of that. The price is right. And with that, I will thank Tanya very much for joining us today. That was really interesting and a great way to kick off this year's season of Yukon programming. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thanks for coming, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.